we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Martin Moore-Ede, who is the light doctor who wrote this wonderful book, which I really recommend everyone read. It's the best book I've read this year, and although we're only 8 days in, I'm pretty sure it's going to stay very top of my 2025 most loved books. It's fascinating. So welcome, Dr. Martin Moore-Ede.
Pleased to be with you, Ben.
The pleasure's ours. When I was doing some research for this conversation with you, I obviously went on your website, and I love the opening quote on your website, which is, "The light we see is as important to our health as the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink." So my question to you is, how did you come to that insight?
Well, I think the focus of so many people who are health conscious has been about food and air and water. We hear all sorts of things about lead pipes in this country, where I am based in the US. Of course, diet and nutrition is so much on everyone's minds. And in fact, when I was starting to talk with publishers about this book, I discovered this incredible number of books that are published on nutrition and diet and health, huge numbers. But nothing, or virtually nothing, on light. In fact, one of the major publishers, Random House Penguin, one of the biggest of all publishers, I found about 1,900 books on nutrition and health and diets of every conceivable type. And only one in their catalog on light, and that was published in 2013, before LED lights even hit the scene. And as we'll discuss later, LED lights have some particular health challenges to them. So it really has been an ignored subject. So I think that's where, putting that together to sort of emphasize that it is quite as important as those things. And in fact, today, there's a lot of discussion going on about such things as early onset cancers. More and more young people that they define under the age of 50, are getting breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, climbing at 2 to 4% a year. And all the discussion in the standard literature is about the effect of nutrition, the gut microbiome, and all the rest of it on it. But, many of the mainstream people are not talking about light. And yet the evidence on light is extraordinarily strong, as I discussed in my book over the last 20 years, huge number of scientific articles and really, really robust research showing not only the links and the causes of a variety of diseases, but also the mechanisms by which they're occurring as a result of the disruption of our circadian clocks by light.
I think to probably frame this conversation, I think to see where we're currently at, it might be helpful to go to the past and where we have been. What have we lost from the light we've been exposed to in our evolutionary past versus what we have now?
Absolutely. Well, most of human history, the first 10,000 generations of Homo sapiens on this planet, were lived by our ancestors under rich daylight, most of the day, much of the day spent outdoors, and then sleeping in the dark at night. And when they did use artificial lights, i.e. candles, or initially wood fires and then candles, those contain virtually no blue content to them. So actually, they're not really particularly disruptive to our health, because the yellow-orange light of the flame of the wood fire really doesn't have much impact on disrupting our circadian rhythms and our health. So it wasn't until Thomas Edison came along and the other people who were inventing light bulbs in the 1880 range of time, and they, of course, came up with these filaments and heated filaments and produced a light that was actually rather similar to candlelight, because that's what they were replacing. And that, again, had a bit more blue in it, but not much more. But as we've moved more and more into being, in recent years, and conscious of so-called energy efficiency, not wasting electricity, the tendency has been to add more and more blue into our lights, so that today the almost universal light that's used in our homes and offices are LEDs that are based on a blue pump, a blue chip, because that's the most electrically efficient way to convert watts of electricity into light. And the problem is, and we've in fact got regulations now, both in Europe and also in North America, that essentially have banned the use of incandescents. Those are the regular old Edison type light bulbs. They banned the use of halogen lights, again low in blue, and they've enforced upon us lights that are very rich in blue. So we've done it to ourselves in a sense, in the name of energy efficiency, and it's a false energy efficiency, because what's really interesting, most people don't realize, and I don't know, how scientifically into this subject your audience is, but to explain a few basics, the white light that we see, a white or yellowish light that we see from either the sun or from light bulbs and light fixtures, is actually composed of a wide range of colors, a rainbow range of colors, from the violets, the blues, the greens, the yellows, the oranges, the reds. And all those colors are what come into our eye. It is actually an optical illusion because our eye synthesizes that together to interpret a balance of colors as being white light. But actually what's coming in and being detected by the photoreceptors in our eyes is actually the individual colors coming in. And what turns out to be very key is those individual colors, some are they're associated with all sorts of health, either benefits or disadvantages. And a lot of it's got to do with the time of day. So getting back to our modern world as compared to what we've done in the last 4 generations, since Thomas Edison, is that we've converted to a world where we're in light that's increasingly bluish in content. We are using a lot of it. We like to have a lot of bright light. So we're dosing ourselves, which is not such a problem during the daytime, because in daytime, our bodies are attuned to blue. We want blue rich light. In fact, the sky is blue rich in content. Even on a cloudy day, it's one of the strongest elements of natural daylight is blue. That blue rich light is critical during the day to keep our bodies in sync, and we can explain the mechanisms with the outside world, keep our rhythms in tune with the natural 24-hour cycle. But when we get into the evening and nighttime hours, that same blue is sending the signal it's still daytime. And that just disrupts our biological clocks and, in fact, creates a whole desynchronization. And basically, we've got millions of different rhythms in the body, millions of clocks, actually. One master clock in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the one I identified when I was at Harvard, back in the 1980s, some time ago. But that clock is the master clock pacemaker. But this system, when it becomes pulled apart and when the various hormones go awry in the body, the melatonin, the cortisol, everything else, it leads to all sorts of disease conditions. And that's a long list. Everything from obesity, diabetes, heart disease, various types of cancer, psychiatric disorders, all heavily associated with whether you have or not had bright blue light during the daytime, or have had too much of it during the nighttime due to these artificial lights. And in fact, it's a longevity thing too. It's not just the rate of cardiovascular disease or breast cancer. If you look at lifespan of people who spend more time outdoors and sleep in the dark at night, their lifespan is years longer, multiple years longer than people who are, in a modern cocoon of indoor, dim light, not much time spent outside, maybe less than 5% time outside, actually outdoors, and then using lights in the evening and at night, and even sleeping with the lights on. Amazingly, 40-50% of people, particularly as they get older, sleep with some lights on in the bedroom. So all of that is, we've totally disrupted Mother Nature, the rhythms of nature. And that's what I think a lot of the modern disease burden is all about. And we can talk about, PFAS chemicals and microplastics and God knows what else. But I think this is the one big overlooked element that is, and the beauty is it's actually the easiest to fix. Just change the darn light bulb. So it's actually pretty straightforward.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when there's different sort of health bubbles, right, where you could have a certain conversation with a certain type of person who has read the same things you have, and that's all well and good. Most people, if you talk about light health, 99% of people will look at you like you're clinically insane.
Absolutely.
And I think, right, and I think in the UK specifically, you're met with a lot of pushback. I think there's got to be some general education before any sort of societal change happens, because there's got to be buy-in. My question for you is the problem too much blue at the wrong time, or is it lack of visible spectrum and non-visible spectrum wavelengths of light we get from the sun?
It's a combination of both. In other words, first of all, very important to point out, and thanks for bringing it up, the sun actually provides us data. The sun, and when we talk about sunlight, we're not just talking about bright sunlight in the blue sky. We're talking about also a dark, cloudy day. Much the same spectrum of light, a little less of it. But it contains a visible part of the light spectrum, but it also contains invisible light. And that is, on one end, it's the ultraviolet light. And if we put it in a sort of generalized description, we measure this in nanometers. So about 300 nanometers to up to around 400 nanometers is basically classified as ultraviolet. 400 to about 700, 750 is classified as visible. Those are the colors of the spectrum. And then when you get above there, you're into the infrared part of the spectrum, again, invisible. And it's what, in the classic, I'm old enough to be brought up in England in a home when I was there with a coal fireplace, which, the classic British fireplace that used to warm your front side and you grow icicles on your backside, because, the heat is directly transferred. It doesn't heat the air. It will heat what it reaches. Now, that infrared turns out to be highly beneficial. It actually stimulates mitochondrial respiration. It changes glucose and other metabolisms. A lot of things going on. Really starting to learn. And there's a lot of, using a fancy word, photobiomodulation. There's a lot going on using the so-called near infrared. That's around the 750 up to 1,000 type of range of infrared. Again, it's invisible. To realize that we can actually change a whole lot of things. Healing tissue, for example, is improved. Scars are repaired much after surgery or burns or whatever are done. So every part of that spectrum, from the invisible. In the invisible part, we have light down in the 300 range, which is most effective at converting in our skin cholesterol to vitamin D, for example. We have light, very interestingly, around the deep violet range, 360 to 400, which is partly what's called UVA these days. But in that light, it actually stimulates the blood flow in the eyes and ensures a healthy eye. And indeed, kids who, one of the big problems is myopia, right? It used to be rare. Now, with everyone indoors not getting natural light, not getting the ultraviolet, not getting the infrared, both have some impact on eye health. We get huge amounts of myopia. So it's climbing towards 50% of the population right now. That short-sightedness through the dysfunction in the eye, due to dysfunction in the blood supply to the eye.
Wow.
So that's just one element that we're missing. And of course, we put blocks that we get scared of UV because of cancer risk. But one of the most fascinating things is I think there's, science always goes and medicine goes to extremes sometimes. So ultraviolet is bad, right? It causes skin cancers and melanomas, and that's a terrible thing. But what's fascinating is that whole pendulum is swinging quite a long way, because and one of the first studies that really showed this in scale was 29,000 Swedish women who were studied because they were concerned about the rate of malignant melanoma in people who are spending time outdoors and how much time should we put limit on outdoors. And what they found was that the there's 29,000 women. They track them for 10, 15 years and see how many of them, what medical conditions they developed, how many of them died. It turned out that the women who spent time outdoors developed more skin cancers, up to 8 times more skin cancers, but they lived years longer. In fact, the lifespan change was as big as whether they were smokers or non-smokers. So that, again, shows you that a single focus on one thing, like ultraviolet light, increases the risk of skin cancers. And they weren't dying of their skin cancers. I mean, that's the other side of it. So it's those types of studies, and there's some big studies in England. The best known are the biobank studies, fascinating study. Someone had incredible foresight, people had incredible foresight putting together. But basically, put together 88,000 people, gave them monitors to detect for a week or so what light they were exposed to. In other words, and they measured a vast number of things. But one of them was how much light they got. And so the people who saw the most light most bright light during the daytime, they could tell whether they're outdoors or not from the intensity of light detected. The people who spent most time outdoors lived longer than those. They had less psychiatric disorders. They had less cardiovascular illness, fewer heart attacks, and all the rest of the people spending time outdoors as compared to those who spend all their time indoors. And similarly, those who had the lights on in the bedroom at night died sooner and had more disease. So again, that's 88,000 people. So one of the incredible things about these studies is with the scale of those studies, you really can see the massive population-sized effects of getting the wrong light at the wrong time. And that's what gives us some pretty big confidence that we're dealing with a pretty major thing that needs to get integrated into the public health conversation, and quite frankly, mostly isn't yet.
So many things come to mind. I mean, especially kids wanting to sleep with the light on at night, and especially at such a critical age of development, you wonder what the long-term implications of that are, especially when it comes to how they develop. So if I hear you right, and just sort of make sure,
I'm going to come back to your kids in a moment. So, but
please let's let
me just respond to the kids just quickly since you raised that interesting one up. I was just talking the other day to some neuroscience researchers in France who've been really focused on the fact that when you look on the internet for lights for mothers with newborn babies, in other words, when you're breastfeeding or when you're feeding your baby and they're waking up in the middle of the night, what lights do you use? And most of those lights are blue-rich lights, which are disturbing the baby in their sleep, also disturbing the mother and father in their sleep. And what they're demonstrating is that if you use lights that are red, in other words, you can still see what you're doing. The baby can still be seen and fed and everything else, that you avoid that problem because you're not disrupting it. But basically, people haven't really realized the importance of different parts of the spectrum in terms of health. And so you want the function of vision, but you don't want to do it at the cost of health. Sorry, but go ahead.
No. I mean, it's a good point. So red light at night is superior to blue because it's not mimicking what you'd get in the day.
That's right. In other words, if you've got the really sensitive part we are sensitive to is sky blue light, a range of about 440 to 495. That's in the sky blue range. It's not the violet blues or the royal blues, but the more sky blue range. That's the light that is actually providing the signal to interpreted by our brains as day. It's the day versus night. You'd say, hey, it's daytime, hey, it's nighttime. Detected by special cells in the back of the eye, photoreceptors, the fancy name, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRGCs. They've got a photopigment inside them, which is uniquely or specifically most sensitive to 480 nanometer sky blue light. And they are sky blue detectors. And when they see sky blue, it's daytime as far as the body is concerned. They send the signal back to the clock through a special bundle of nerves to the circadian pacemaker, master circadian pacemaker called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN. And then that triggers melatonin. And if there's lots of blue, melatonin doesn't get released. And therefore the cells of the body don't know that they don't get the signal it's nighttime. And so, but normally, if you're in the dark, melatonin rises, and that tells the body time for repair, restoration, clean up any cancer cells in the body that need to be suppressed. All that stuff goes on just automatically. So, yeah, it's very much about it. So if you use red light, you don't trigger that response. So it's really a question of understanding the different wavelengths of light. And what's fascinating is more and more we're discovering specific wavelengths do specific things. Green light cures migraines. Royal blue 460 light repairs the jaundice in newborn babies. 405 nanometer violet light kills bacteria. It's amazing. All the benefits of sunlight we've been known since Florence Nightingale or before. The most important thing to her was not only fresh air, but good quality light. They put the patients out in sunlight and they got better. And we're sort of understanding why that all works now in detail.
It's a fascinating problem when you realize, when you try to put as a percentage what time most people spend indoors or in a car without exposure to this kind of light throughout their lifetime, and then suddenly a lot of problems start to come to the fold of maybe we're looking in the wrong areas of these things. So when it comes to chronic disease and, as you said, skyrocketing cancer rates, what is the evidence behind the link between too much blue light at the wrong time and or lack of a broad spectrum of light from the sun? What link do we have that those two things could amplify chronic diseases like cancer?
Well, several bits of evidence. I mean, let's just take breast cancer, probably the best studied. Breast cancer used to be a very rare cancer in women, quite rare. It's way down. It's now by the most common and the most lethal form of cancer for women. Breast cancer really started climbing as electric light was introduced. And you can track this. You can look at different countries that produced electric light at different times and how rapidly the breast cancer rates rose. So Iceland, interestingly, was very slow to develop electric public electricity in homes and everything else because it has no fossil fuels. And so then it didn't start building power plants until late in the 1920s, for example, whereas in the US and Europe, they're building power plants in the 1880s. So electrification was slow, and again, the climb was slow. But as they got fully electrified, and the rates went up. So that's one type of thing. And places today, women who've never seen electric light in sub-Saharan Africa, large parts of the world that don't have electrification. Again, extremely low rates of breast cancer. Numbers, 20 per 100,000 women, as compared to about 120, 140 per 100,000 women in Western societies, like Western Europe and Eastern United States, dense and electrically lit places. Women who are blind rarely get breast cancer. That's an interesting one because they've got all the same environmental toxins. Considerably, and I mean blind since an early age is what's important, right?
Is that because what mechanistically? Why is that? Are they not getting any light into their eyes, or?
Well, they're not. It depends how blind they are and what type of different types of blindness, of course. But the general observation is it's because if you're not getting light, they're not getting any light at night, right? That's really the sensitive part. They're not seeing when the electric light is on. They don't care whether the electric lights are on or not, because if you're visually blind and you can't see it, what really matters, of course, is those special photoreceptors. Are they getting the light or not? That's a bit more driving into the weeds on that one. But basically, it's so again, it sort of points to this thing, and then we see as we increase the introduction of a steep climb in these early onset cancers. It's been going on since about 2015 or so, when LED lights start to get developed. Again, that's associative. It's not proof by itself. On the other hand, there's a ton of animal research that's shown literally you can take human breast cancer cells, implant them onto the skin of rats, and they'll grow as human breast cancer tumors. And if that rat has the lights on at night, the cancer grows much faster than if the rat's in the dark at night. Similarly, if you take the blood from women who are at night, sitting in the dark at night when their melatonin levels are high, or the same women taken with the lights, bright lights, sitting in bright lights and the melatonin levels very low, take those blood samples, send them down to the lab with the rats, infuse them into the rats with the human breast cancer tumors. Guess what? The high melatonin blood suppresses the growth of those tumors. The low melatonin blood enables those tumors to grow rapidly. So lots and lots of bit of data. And so basically, these first studies were, and then of course, people who are exposed to light at night have at least 50% more breast cancer. And what are they? They're people who are working on night shifts, or people who actually have the lights on in the bedroom at night. They have higher rates of breast cancer. Again, still lots and lots of bits of information that come together that say this at least beyond the. I mean, I think there's much evidence that the smoking causes lung cancer, quite frankly. In terms of the scale of the amount of evidence that exists. So we've got to look at this as a major environmental problem, and as I say, I come back to the fact it's such a fixable problem. It just changed the light bulb.
So mechanistically speaking, cancer's a loaded word, and definitely it's a loaded topic of discussion with prevailing theories and research. I mean, we've had Dr. Thomas Seyfried on the show before, who's got a very non-consensus view that cancer is a metabolic disease, essentially. Whether you believe that or not, what mechanistically do you think exacerbates cancer rates out of being deficient in this light? I mean, we know it's to do with melatonin somehow, but
melatonin is a cancer suppressant, an antioxidant. It actually effectively suppresses the growth of cancer cells. We all have a tendency to have a few cells in our body go awry. Melatonin is one of the mechanisms that cleans that up, and it's very effective at cleaning that up. And it affects the initiation of cancers, the growth of cancers, and the spread of cancers are all influenced by whether there's melatonin there or not. So if you're in blue-rich, the standard LED lights in the evening at night, and you're suppressing your melatonin, you're not giving yourself the benefit of nature's natural way to clean up the disease. There's more to it than that. It's not, melatonin is just one of the signals, because sometimes people say, well, let's give melatonin and solve the problem. It's not just that, because it's actually, melatonin just happens to be a marker of a whole lot of processes that are triggered at night to protect our bodies against the ravages of cells going awry.
Yeah, it's that was my next question. It was going to be, well, why wouldn't people just supplement melatonin? But as you put more elegantly like it, downstream of all these things are such complex processes, some of which to my understanding, we don't even know.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, we just know. I mean, it's convenient when you've got a marker. Then you can do research and you can correlate the correlations and do the studies, everything else. It doesn't prove the whole thing is that one mechanism alone. In fact, there's huge redundancy in human physiology and function. It's not just one thing, but it's also this disarray. We know that when the body is not beating in a perfect rhythm, and when you're, let's say you're in a natural world, you're spending much of your day, a lot of time outside. By the way, the morning hours are much more effective, interestingly, than the evening hours. So light in the morning is the most important. Just go on a sidetrack there for a moment. Fascinating study. Being repeated several times. Psychiatric patients admitted to a psychiatric hospital. They got severe depression, anxiety, PTSD, etc. The hospital has a ward where on one side of all the rooms are facing south and east, and the other side all the rooms are facing north and west. They all got big windows. And guess what? The patients admitted to those with the same therapy, same doctors, same conditions, same drugs, admitted to the windows that face the morning sunlight coming in, get out in half the time, discharged in half the time from the same conditions as those admitted to the north and west facing rooms. So again, we've got a pretty good clue that morning light is important, and we sort of understand that biologically in terms of that's the most important time to synchronize. So anyway, but I took you off your topic, but it was a good one to make, I think.
Absolutely, no, tangents encouraged. It's the far more interesting than my questions. The question that came up in prep for this was academic studies in general. Regardless of what you're testing, whether it be in animals or humans, most have been done under blue light. What if any, does that have any implication of how we would start to incorporate what we now know about different spectrums of light and testing various biological processes in the lab or in humans moving forward?
Well, basically, I mean, how we approach this whole thing is to say, okay, we identified way back in the 1980s, going back when I was at Harvard in the 1980s, we identified the clock in the human brain, the SCN. We also demonstrated, it wasn't really thought at the time, that it actually was light falling on the eyes that was synchronizing our circadian clock and our rhythms of the body. We didn't realize at the time, it didn't occur to us that it was any special feature of light or special wavelengths of light. But as I say, by the year 2000, there started to be evidence that particularly blue light in particular was effective, although the evidence was the violet and the and green also had some effect, fairly broad effect. And then we looked at that, realized that was all done with the dark adapted eye, people sitting in the dark, which is a rather artificial situation. So when we did this in the light adapted eye, we were able to identify the precise wavelengths that we want. And that turns out to be a peak around 480 in the sky blue, and as I say, between 440 up to 495. So it's not a green effect, it's not a violet effect, it's a blue effect. So what we've done to then, the other side of it, is go and build lights that have no blue in them, but have the other colors of the rainbow. So you can build lights that have a chip in them that's violet, for example, down at 420. There's no effect on the circadian clock. And then you spectrally engineer the light so it doesn't produce. You can either do it with filters, or you can actually build special LED chips. So what do you do with LEDs? I don't know if you know the LED, but there's a chip, and then there's a phosphor coating. The phosphors take the blue light that comes, or whatever color light comes out of the chip, and then convert it into a range of colors so it looks like white light. So you can change the phosphors around and actually generate chips that now do this, and you can produce effectively zero blue lights, but still have violet and still have all the colors of the rainbow. Now we can do studies with those as compared to the standard blue-rich chip light, and we can show big effects. For example, we can, the amount of melatonin that comes out with the same brightness of the light. So with a photometer, for example, measuring lux or whatever, it's the same number, but you can get 6-7 more times difference in the amount of melatonin being produced at night, depending on whether or not you got blue there or not. We know that blue light is it's about 20 times more effective at shifting clocks, the circadian clock, than white light. So you can have a very dim blue light doing all the same thing as a bright white light, because it's only really the blue part of it that does the trick. So if you know the spectrum, you can then spectrally engineer. And that's what's on the market now and coming now in light bulbs this year. It's out in fixtures. We put it into about 60-odd Fortune 500 companies. We're able to study people working around the clock under the lights, which automatically switched from blue-rich day to zero blue nights, and showed improvement in sleep, performance. They made fewer errors in the workplace. They had fewer gastrointestinal disorders and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of studies you can do on the proactive side of it, not just studying associations, but actually going and building lights to test the theory and demonstrate that it works. So that's what we call sort of circadian lighting that regulates what comes out. Now, that's one part of it. I think there are other parts that we're more and more learning about, like the infrared. I think there's some real value in adding infrared into light. Interestingly, the incandescent light bulbs, the old Edison light bulbs, are all banned now. contain a lot of infrared. That's the invisible part of the spectrum, right? That's at the far red, but you can't see it. That light actually is produced in quantities by incandescent light bulbs, but the LEDs today are designed just to produce visible light in a particularly bright visible light, and that gets into the challenge because we've got a physics problem here or an engineering problem here, because the way engineers look at electrical efficiency of light is to use a term called lumens, and they measure the lumens per watt. Now, the lumens is the amount of light coming out. But lumens is not a measure of the broad spectrum. It's only a measure of essentially the green and the yellow wavelengths of light that our eye interprets as brightness. So the real thing is, how cheaply can you produce bright light is what you're doing with lumens per watt. But you're also producing very unhealthy light because it doesn't have those other colors in it. So really, I think we're learning, we need to go back to, the best solution is get outside every day, all right? Nature has it there, available for you, it's free. But during the daytime, you need to get outside, but if you can't, then light that has a broader spectrum of wavelengths in it. And at night, you need to remove those that are going to disrupt the circadian clock.
So in an ideal world, you would take all the light bulbs out the house or the office, and you would put them on a timer to simulate the spectrums of light you would be getting from the sun if you were outside.
Absolutely, yeah. You don't want to do this. You can buy light bulbs that are single function. They're a night light bulb or day light bulb. The problem is you have to change the things or have different lamps on different times and remember, right? That's life is too many things to remember. And so, right at the very beginning, it's very clear this has to be automatic. It needs to be linked to local sunset and sunrise at your longitude and latitude and the season of the year. Is all inside the control system. You shouldn't have to think about it. It's like, your breathing. If I start asking you to think about your breathing will become irregular. But if you don't think about your breathing, it automatically goes cycling through itself very nicely. It takes care of itself. It's an automatic function that you can override. The last thing you want to do is mess with it. Now, in a hospital setting, you might sometimes want to briefly switch on brighter lights or whatever to deal with an emergency. But normally, the way lights should operate should be on an automatic system.
The implications on society, if this was done well, would be vast, right? I mean, do you think it would be one of the single greatest levers to pull for the next century of health? Or
I think it is. Yes, I mean, I think there is. It's a challenge of supply and demand. Two sides of this coin, right? In other words, if the lighting companies, the manufacturers, won't build this unless they believe that consumers will use it. For few manufacturers are like Steve Jobs' attitude, who says, "I know what people need. I'll make it anyway." And to hell with market research. So they'll never tell you. They don't understand it. In reality, you've got supply and demand in the real world. So basically, the public has got to be demanding this. And yet, if it's not available, but they also need the supply. The manufacturers need to build it. And the manufacturers need to put a significant investment in building new lights, which are more complex, more controls and everything else. And if no one's going to buy them because no one knows they need them, that's the problem. So you've got to handle both sides of that. And layered on top of that are really backward regulations, which define lumens per watt. And we've got a very strict one just being introduced in the US. It's 120 lumens per watt, which basically can only be achieved by these blue-rich LEDs. And any healthy light, including these healthy circadian lights I was talking about, can't meet that standard because all it's doing is measuring green and yellow and treats all the healthy colors of the rainbow as wasted watts. Anytime you spend, if you provide infrared or you provide some UV, you provide some violet light or whatever else, it doesn't count in the calculation. And hence it's at a disadvantage in terms of meeting sort of stringent rules. And you've got even more stringent rules in the UK, some pretty aggressive regulation going on, well-meaning, but totally ill-formed, going on in the UK. So I think they're talking about cranking it up to 140 lumens per watt in the UK.
Wow, I mean, it's just this efficiency mindset. It's so it's so backward. It's almost it needs a different spectrum. If you're optimizing for efficiency, you'll get it. But if you're optimizing for health, then it's just a different spectrum, right?
Well, I mean, it's a sanity thing. If you stop back for a moment, you say, wait a second, okay. So we're going to put light bulb rules in for home, and the light bulbs are largely in residential spaces where people live in the evening at night, right? And you're going to have light bulbs. Well, light bulbs only consume 6% or less of the electricity of your house, right? Your heating system, your air conditioning, your appliances, and everything else are far, far greater use of electricity. So now, for saving on that 6%, we're going to put in we're going to enforce light bulbs that are going to give you ill health. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. Besides, are we reducing with all these regulations? Everyone's concerned with global warming, health of the planet. Absolutely, right. Climate change, big issue. Everyone's bought into that, or many people have bought into that, perhaps a little less in America now. But essentially, what's happening there? Well, are we reducing electricity use? No. We're consuming more and more electricity because we're building data centers, which for artificial intelligence and for crypto mining, which consume vast quantities. So we certainly haven't saved electricity. So we're creating ill health for people by forcing them to have unhealthy light bulbs, and that saved electricity is going straight to artificial intelligence data centers. Doesn't make much sense.
No, it needs to be a rehaul. And I mean, I've got my own opinions on this, but that should be quite a good, interesting question to ask you, which is, do you think the solution is it's going to be entrepreneurial, or do you think the solution is going to be at the government level?
Well, there are two things. Number one, we have to get rid of the regulations that trap manufacturers into a purely these blue-rich LED lights is the only thing they manufacture, because they're the only things that can meet the regulations. In fact, we are just launching a petition now to reverse that regulation in the States based on all this medical information. So we think actually with the new Trump administration, we've got a reasonable chance of getting unnecessary regulations removed. And this one really needs to get out of the way. And so this 125 lumen per watt rule that's in there is purely a function of some bureaucrats or some engineers sitting in the Department of Engineering, not biologists or not medical people at all, who put this thing together and ramrolled it through just so they could put a notch in the, we're doing our thing for energy conservation and the health of the planet. So we've got an education campaign just being launched. So, anybody who sees your podcast in the United States, we'd encourage to contact me about the campaign we're doing. We want to get a lot of signatures on the petition and try to get this thing, moved. This rule that really is preventing progress. Now, right now we can have these healthy lights, but this rule, 125 lumen watt rule, goes into effect in 2028. We need to get rid of it before then, well before then, so manufacturers will continue to build entrepreneurially lights that will solve this problem, right? So that, I think, is a big part of it. I think, and the other is, it's consumer education. That's why I wrote my book, The Light Doctor, and why I do these podcasts and why I have a Substack column and, the rest of it, right? Getting that word out and getting people educated, because we need to be as concerned about that as we are concerned about what we eat, et cetera, as I've discussed.
Yeah, wonderfully put. Wonderfully put. The regulation, does it apply to people's own homes, or is it just commercial buildings?
No, it's light bulbs per se, wherever they are.
Wow. And
so
the UK?
It's called general service lamps, which is a fancy word for light bulbs.
Right. Okay. Understood. Well, interesting. Definitely an interesting time. When it comes to, I guess, what people can take away and implement in their own life before they can, rejig their whole house and everything, maybe it's good to us. How do you approach this on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I've where I live, we have southeast facing windows in the main room and balcony facing southeast. So I've chosen a place, my wife and I chose a place that's facing the sun in the mornings. So that's number one. Number two, I go out for a walk every morning in order to be out in that natural daylight at the time when it's most effective. Two, we've got inside the house light bulbs that are zero blue in the bedrooms and those sort of spaces for the evening space. So when we're, in the evenings, we're not getting the blue, we're getting decent quality light, but it's the light formula that I invented and is available from a company called Sora, Soraa. Right now, there's light bulbs. And then we sleep in a darkened bedroom at night, properly, light-proof, protecting curtains and drapes, so it's truly dark. And when we have an alarm clock in the room, it's got a red dial on it, not a white or a blue dial on it. Just a few of the details.
Mm. No, it's wonderful, and I think people will listen to that and think, "Oh, that's it. That's all I have to do?" Like, yeah,
it's not too hard. It isn't too hard.
Well, I think it's a good example of what, essentially, like a power law in action, right? What are the small things that make the biggest impact on the health? And often it's really simple stuff, but I guess it's not sexy, it's not fancy. It's just, be mindful of your light hygiene and the time of day you have it, and being outside is the best. But if you can't do that, try to mimic the natural rhythm of the sun, right?
That's right. And regularity is also a key part of it. The more regular you can make your lifestyle, so that means, sleeping at a fairly consistent time and waking at a fairly consistent time. That is associated with more health. The more irregular your life pattern is, the more that shortens lifespan and has effect on your health. Mm. So it's, the body is designed for regularity. In the old days before electric lights, we were just so governed by light and dark, natural light and dark, just ruled everything. We humans weren't designed to be wandering around at night. The saber-toothed tigers and the like had much better night vision than we did, and we were, we became prey. So basically, and the clocks in our body have got a key function, which is predictive. In other words, they get the body warmed up and ready for the day ahead. So all those mechanisms, those clocks are doing more than just telling the time of day. They are actually getting us ready and are able to predict dawn and dusk, and get us ready, because you don't want to be caught at the wrong time, wrong place.
Absolutely not. When do you think we've had the best relationship with light in our history?
Well, I think probably before electric light was invented, but then we had a whole lot of other diseases. This is the interesting balance, right? When Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, the average American lived at a life expectancy of 39 years. So you could say, well, they had lots of the right light and everything else, but it didn't solve the problem. Well, of course, there were all sorts of other public health problems. There were no vaccines. There were no antibiotics. There was no public health management of water, sanitation, everything else. Lot of diseases and were not treatable, right? So there was a lot of natural ill health going on, and so that was true of those days. But we've now maxed out, done huge advantages in terms of clean water, clean air, all those things, and certainly medical advances. But as a result, we've sort of reached a bit of a plateau in life expectancy. In fact, it's really flattened out. It used to be climbing longer and longer with medical advances. Now it's been static. In fact, dipped a little bit during COVID, of course, but it's pretty much been a static level for the last 10 years or so. I think there is another boost to natural, healthy lifespan. No one wants to have lifespan, but health span. A boost to natural, healthy life. If we now got our lighting cleaned up and compatible with nature, and not just using this very artificial, very harmful light that our modern LEDs provide.
What research are you most excited about in the future?
Well, I think what I'm seeing where the developments are is understanding all the different parts of the spectrum and what they're doing. So I think there's a whole lot of work going on in infrared now, and that's just one part that is, for example, recent study just came out, the infrared, there's a number of studies, it changes your glucose metabolism, but another one did people sitting in a cubicle with white lights in the cubicle, volunteers, but some of those white lights had infrared added to the white light. They couldn't see it, it's invisible, but it looks exactly the same. But what happened was when they were sitting in that cubicle with the infrared light, that their heart rate variability went up, which means that they got into a more relaxed state, the parasympathetic part of the body. Again, too much. I'm a professor of physiology, as you probably know, so I'm getting too much detail here. But there are two automatic systems, autonomic systems in the body: sympathetic, fight or flight; parasympathetic, relax, metabolize, digest your food, and so forth. And we live in a balance between those two. But you could calm people down, relax them, just by putting them, even though they weren't aware there was infrared, and they felt a sense of pleasure. So I'd like to say, as I said in one of my LinkedIn blogs there, it's not the alcohol and the eggnog as you sit before the fire and feel relaxed. It's actually more likely the infrared coming out of that fireplace that's helping you get a sense of pleasure.
Wow. What do you think about smartphones' implication on having a constant blue light in such a concentrated manner?
Well, that's certainly adding blue light to the mix. I think one of the misconceptions and one of the things that people get a little hung up about is there effect of these smartphones or blue light on your sleep, on your time of sleep when you fall asleep, the so-called sleep onset. In other words, when you fall asleep. And there actually isn't very much difference whether you've got blue light or not blue light in the evening, or use a smartphone, don't use a smartphone. There might be 10 minutes or less difference in the time you fall asleep. The trouble is that the time you fall asleep is not just determined by your circadian clock. It's determined by how long you've been awake and the accumulation of sleepiness during the day. We get progressively sleepier the longer we're awake. Determined by what you're doing, whether emotional activity or anything that's alerting you in the evening. So it's more likely what you're watching on the smartphone that may be doing that effect. But, and the big but, when you do use blue light from whether it's smartphones or from LED lights in the evening, you shift that clock over, you suppress the melatonin. You're doing all sorts of things to your circadian timing system that may not be observed as a change in sleep. You do change the amount of dreaming sleep you have. You change the quality of your sleep. But that, if you just take one metric, i.e. the time I fall asleep, that's the wrong one. So people get a bit hung up on this. Oh, there's no effect of blue light because the time they fall asleep doesn't change. That's really missing the whole boat because there's a lot more going on and a lot more ill effects of that blue light than just the time of sleep onset.
Do you think there's a good argument for blue light blocking glasses then?
Yes, I do. Now, however, with a qualification, blue light blocking glasses are often advertised for aesthetics, and you see them, which are relatively clear. They don't look as they've got any color to them, or they look like normal glasses. They do nothing because they're actually blocking the wrong blue. Some of these are just blocking violet blues, and they don't even touch the sky blue color that's the circadian clock. So be really leery. Blue blocking glasses that are going to be effective are going to be ones that are actually more yellow-orange in color. So that's that's another whole topic which we'd get into another time. But essentially, yes, they can be effective and are effective at preventing the circadian effect. But you're going to make sure you get the right ones, and there are a lot of other solutions as well.
Okay, wonderful. Just another one. So I wear a smartwatch like this, right?
Yes.
It's an exercise thing, and when I take it off, for the people who aren't watching the video, there's a constant green pulse of light going into my skin all the time. Does that in any way affect my health negatively if it's a 24/7 barrage onto my wrist?
I don't know. I don't think anybody's studied that precisely. It probably is not doing much effect on the circadian system because that's more sensitive to the blue than the green. But yeah, I mean, we are just learning all these things. Again, when I said there was area of research, I think we're really learning what all those individual colors of the rainbow that we see as white light, but it's actually all these different colors, are triggering different responses. For example, we found that 400 violet light is actually alerting. So people, if you're working at night and you've got some violet light in the mix, people make fewer errors and everything because it actually keeps them more alert when they need to be, but it doesn't influence their sleep when they start looking at it. But this is a big area that is expanding rapidly, but the basics are there. Really avoid these blue-rich LEDs like the plague. They're causing a lot of ill disease in the evening hours and in the nighttime hours, and don't use lights at night. So those are the basic messages.
And I appreciate we're coming to the time. Just want to get this one last one in because I have family in Australia. What would you say to people who are scared of the sun?
First of all, too much of anything can be a problem. I mean, the truth of everything is too little of everything or too much of everything is, whether it's fluoride, sun, whatever it is, right? So yes, if you get too much bright sunlight, that can damage the eyes. Really bright sunlight, midday sunlight. That's why we advise getting out in the mornings before the sun reaches its peak is the time to get light. The fear of the fear of the sun is not good at all. So getting outside every day is really critical, particularly in the morning hours, because that is a big longevity factor. That's well demonstrated.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Martin Moore-Ede, your book is a wonderful place for people to start. I would highly recommend people pick it up and do read it because it's really digestible. And it goes into a lot more depth than we did today. Can you recommend any other books to sort of help one sort of build a bit of an opinion on this and get a bit more fluent?
Well, it depends there are, a fair amount of scientifically oriented books in the area, obviously, and conferences and all the like. There hasn't been too much in terms of, interesting book is, there was one called Health and Light. It was published back in 1973 by a guy called Art, who actually observed a lot of these effects. A fascinating book. But it was before all this science had been done. But he found, for example, that ultraviolet light, the absence of ultraviolet light, because he used filters. He was a time-lapse photographer. The absence of ultraviolet light meant apples didn't ripen on a tree, rabbits didn't breed. All sorts of things were fascinating just in terms of the missing elements that we block out. We block them out with our modern windows, by the way. Most windows in cars and our houses remove the UV. UV comes out of is all removed out of our eyewear too. So some of those things, and if you use plain glass that doesn't block it, then you get a whole lot of health effects. So yeah, that's an interesting one to look at in terms of the history of light. Sold 3 million copies back in 1973. Pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah, I know a lot of those old books came a bit of a resurgence. I mean, sort of The Body Electric by Becker, I think, as well, and it's this whole I guess old literature is sort of having a bit of a resurgence. But yeah, well, look, thank you so much for coming on. That was a real privilege for me. Where can we keep up to date with your work and what you're up to?
Well, first of all, there is a website, the Substack. I published bi-weekly a column on Substack. The column's called The Light Doctor, which is really update new things going on, keep abreast of the research and so forth. Beyond the book, because it's a dynamic field, and new activities going on. Secondly, look at circadianlight.org, which is a guidepost as to where to find lights and bulbs and fixtures, and also join a campaign for healthy lighting. You can do that at circadianlight.org.
Wonderful. Well, look, thank you again, and hopefully we'll do this again in the future.
Good. Thank you very much, Ben. Enjoyable.